The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Good morning and good evening, everyone. This is the Agile Coaching Network. This is episode 61. Wow, where has the time gone? I want to thank everyone for attending today. We have well over 100,000 listens to the podcast, and I know that there have been pretty close to about 10,000 people who have signed up for the live event, which is pretty impressive. And then we get several hundred of you who say, you know what, I'm going to take time out of my Friday, could be Friday evening or your Friday morning or Friday midday, wherever it is, and you join us. And I really appreciate that because we couldn't actually do the show without you. As everyone knows, we're brought to you by the Agile Alliance. The Agile Alliance is a nonprofit organization. It's a member trade organization made up of roughly around 100,000 subscribers and members, as well as a number of corporate members who've given us an investment in order for us to be able to provide the advocacy and these programs that we do. I want to do a special call out because we had a couple of renewals that took place over this month and a couple of new Cornerstone members that have joined in. Intel Corporation, Lockheed Martin, both renewed for another year. So if you're a part of those organizations, please reach out to your corporate admins and say thank you. And then also now ServiceNow has joined us in the Cornerstone area, which we're glad to have them. Go take a look at their products and the stuff that they're doing for the Agile community. It looks like all pretty good stuff. I'm joined by a cast of regulars, and a couple of the regulars are not here this week. Shauna and Deanna are both unfortunately unable to make it, but Hendrik and Jorg are here, which are great. And then also I've invited Daniel. Daniel can do an introduction when we call on and go through after the monologue. But Daniel's been an Agile coach and a leader around the community. Probably follow him, and you can see some of his stuff that he's been posting online, either on LinkedIn and others. I've invited him in because he had a couple of kind of opinions about, how do we, for the topic we're going to go over today, how do we generate advocacy within the Agile community? So with that, I want to kick off today's session with talking about advocacy. I gave a keynote yesterday at Agile India, and afterwards we had some great conversations with some of the conference attendees. And we were talking about transformation in particular, transformation within the larger context of the organization. And if you've been a long-time listener to the Agile Coaching Network, you know that we've spent the question of how do I get my organization to do something? How do I advocate for that? The advocacy, as you see, that happens sometimes in organizations where, in the case of transformations, sort of the top-down mandate issues. And I think Hendrik had a really great framing for a few episodes back, which was, that whole notion of tomorrow, your favorite color is going to be blue. And we had some really great conversations on that about how do we unwind. But advocacy is something that's kind of interesting because there's two parts of it, I think. I think it's the advocacy that we do. I can tell you that I sometimes get on my soapbox and talk about things in a particular framing with the goal of influencing others. People in the Agile Alliance community, if you think of it as an organization, it is made up of members. Literally, the board members are members of the organization. They got voted up by other members, people who are running initiatives within the program, and I just threw up the ones that are currently active today. These were all things that members pitched and members are currently running and trying to grow advocacy around a whole bunch of different topics. And, some of these topics might resonate with you. Anything what Dr. Dave does with the 5 Saturdays program, thinking that Agile works really well for young adults, great skills of how to go be, more successful in their life, to growing Russia equity, the emerging economies initiative, all of these. These are all member driven. And the reason why they coupled together is because they knew that advocacy by themselves required a bigger voice. It required a little bit of help. And so they chose to associate with the trade organization in order to go do that. So my opening question here is advocacy itself. As a coach, how do you advocate for something? And specifically what I want to know, what is in your toolkit? What do you currently use today that you find are an effective way of advocating for something that you're trying to go change within the environment that you're in? Second to that, what in that toolkit hasn't worked? I mean, those of us who are wanting to learn from you, we want to find out what are the things that you discarded from your toolkit, because I tried that multiple times. I tried to maybe copy a pattern somebody else had, and it just didn't work in my company whatsoever. And the last one is, and this is to the associations that we're a part of. What should associations be doing in this space? I gave you some examples of what the Agile Alliance is doing, but I know that there's a number of different organizations out there that you probably are a member of. Which ones do you think that are doing advocacy well, and what do you think that they need to step up to a little bit more with? To open up the dialogue on this, Jorg, do you want to take the first stab at this?
Maybe we would leave the stage to Daniel for a short introduction first. Otherwise, I can go ahead.
Sure. Actually, why don't Daniel? Daniel joined us on the panel today. Daniel, you want to give a brief introduction of yourself, since I just threw your name out there?
Hi. Yeah. So, who am I? Well, I'm Daniel Mezek. I'm calling from my undisclosed location in North Guilford, Connecticut, USA. I've been involved in the Agile stuff since 2006, when I took a CSM class with a guy named Lowell Lindstrom in Chicago. And since that time, I've done Agile coaching, executive coaching, and Agile change work in organizations, dozens of them. So, big and small. And I've written 3 books on organizational change. And that's my short bio.
Awesome. So rather than me skipping back over to Jorg, what do you think about this topic as far as as a coach? What are some of the tools that you use? What's in your toolkit?
I'm reading a book called Hook: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And on page 119, it says that the magic words are, when you want to persuade someone, which I think what advocacy is about, right? The magic words are, after you give your pitch, the magic words are, but you are free to accept or refuse. In other words, it's your option. You're not being imposed or mandated or forced or coerced. I'm inviting you into something here, and you're free to accept or refuse. That's my number one tool in my toolkit. Yeah, so this also extends to executives and executive coaching. So usually when you want to get something done in an organization, authority gets it done. And by authority, I mean people with authority to decide, people with the decision rights to, make it happen, right? So if you can influence those folks, then you can get lots of things done. I have found that inviting executives to have a learning experience in the form of maybe listening to this podcast, reading a little bit out of a book, watching a little bit out of a video, that will go a long way towards becoming part of the leadership system. And once you have someone who's advocating for you because they learned off of you, 2 things happen. You've positioned yourself as a trusted advisor with that individual leader. And number 2, that individual leader will then usher you into the leadership system, and you'll be able to get an audience with the rest of the individuals on the leadership team. So that's also my number one tool in terms of advocacy to authority.
Awesome. Hendrik, I'm going to bring you in for a second because you've been in leadership in your company for a long period of time. How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm totally with Daniel on these things. It's really important to not make anything a religion or to start preaching stuff, because what we are discussing here is not about a belief. It's actually about something that we believe is working, but it's our view on things, and we cannot force anybody. Like the example that you cited before, like from tomorrow onwards your favorite color is blue. It just doesn't work. But I can start showing you a lot of wonderful blue things, and maybe after some time you might think like, oh, this blue is actually not so bad after all. So this is maybe how these things work. What I have found over the years is that I mean, I started pretty much off with a teaching approach. So people just need to understand and they will follow. And then I just found out that teaching is sometimes the wrong way how to do it, because some people don't want to be taught. So in the meantime, I'm more seeding ideas. So I'm coming up with ideas or something, and I start testing these ideas with people in the company. And I see, does it resonate? Do I use the right language? How can I formulate things better? And after this initial exploration round, usually I start networking. Yeah? So I try to seed the idea further, potentially to people who have a bit of influence and who can give me a larger stage. And if I'm lucky, I'm running across a leader or a leadership team who are inviting me and say, okay, I think you have a great idea here and let's talk about that. Yeah. And this is a bit the path that I have found is working to advocate for something and still leave the door open for a constructive discussion on, am I getting this right? Or maybe you have another perspective which I can incorporate in my idea or make it our idea. That's, from my point of view, very, very important.
Jörg, how about yourself?
Yeah, one thing I try to do is to connect the left and the right hemispheres of the brain by telling stories that are both based in facts and that bring emotion. So it's either from a past success or even a past failure that is always needs to be relevant to the situation and the people at hand. So it doesn't help if I tell a team of engineers about CEO problems without relating it to them and the other way around, actually. So it depends a lot on whom you are talking to. Speak their language is one of the most important tools. So often, especially if you're new to a company, listen first, because otherwise you don't know the language and it's always a bit different, so that you can hit this and then make them imagine things that could be different and show them a way what they should try to get there. And stories work well for this. If you don't bring any facts why this should work, what's behind it, then it's really hard to get them structured, because then it's just wishful thinking. So you need to combine both. You need to get the exact things and the imagination going. And saying that, what doesn't work is leave people alone with any advocacy. You need to give them a hand to really do it, highlight a way how to get more information, how to go beyond yourself as a coach, as a contact. If you leave people alone, they probably will stop very soon. So without either bringing them into a community or starting building a community or an exchange, what you do is normally very short-lived. That's definitely important.
Absolutely, I agree with all the points so far. I think. But what do you guys do about the fact that when people say that we're a unique snowflake? You just showed the data that's been presented to me. Yeah, that might have worked for XYZ company, but hey, we're not XYZ company. What do we do? What do we do in that case?
That's what I mean with listening and talking their language. So I once had a actually big panel, and they were getting an upfront lesson on Scrum, and I was just sitting in the back and listening. And then somebody said, all this retrospective stuff doesn't work. Interesting thing, I knew those guys were doing this every time they finished a job, more or less every 3 weeks. They reflected what went well and what went wrong. They actually did it, but they didn't make the connection at all. And as I pointed it out, they started to smile. They understood their story was actually the story up front, and not somebody pushing them to do something they hated. And then they said, if it's that, then it makes sense. And that helps a lot. So if you don't know exactly what people are about, it's really, really hard to give them any meaningful opinion.
Sure. And Hendrik, I know that as a unique snowflake, you've brought me into your company a couple of times to share my thoughts and my ideas. And I'm just kind of curious, how do you deal with the unique snowflake problem?
No, I mean, I take this mostly as a feedback to myself that I have probably failed to speak their language, like Jörg is saying. An important thing, I think, always is that we start from the challenge or problem, that we don't come in with a solution, but rather start from what is this organization's need and what are their challenges and problems. And then showing how my idea might help them in coping with the problem or challenge. Another thing is that I often use the word translate. So for example, when I say, okay, for example, Agile is very well known from a practical point of view in software development, but when I talk to a marketing and communications department, I always tell them, okay, this is what Agile is in principle, but we need to translate this into your context. So I'm always inviting people to join forces with me to explore how could this work in their environment.
Awesome. And Daniel, how about yourself?
Yeah. What's the precise question again?
The precise question is, how do you deal with the unique snowflake issue, which is you bring in the data of an individual and everyone goes, oh, well, that just won't work here.
Yeah. So if you use, I would direct the people towards clean language and clean questions, the people who are listening here. One of the clean questions is, if things went just the way you would like, it would be like what? Right? That's a great open-ended question where the client can start solutioning or describing the outcome without solutioning. They can state what they desire, what they intend, what they want, and you can immediately find out about that, and then you can open up your toolkit and provide them with some options that might lead to this outcome. So that's the approach I take, is ask open-ended type questions about what it is they actually want. A lot of folks don't know what they want, and those who know what they want often can't express it. Clean questions and from clean language can give you a tool that can help you solve both of those problems.
Sheila, are you there? What do you have on this?
My big toolkit, and I think I've mentioned this before, is Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. And if I'm trying to advocate for something, I should have a really good understanding of what it is I'm advocating for. And as Chris Voss says, you're going to get that no, so you're talking about the snowflake, and that's going to happen very often where somebody's going to say, no, that doesn't work for me. And as I think Daniel was saying, yeah, what does work for you? And doing that negotiation where you get what they're looking for. And because you're advocating, how what you have will satisfy that problem. So it's that negotiation, that back and forth, that listening, and everybody likes to be heard. So if you make it a conversation and let whoever you're speaking with be heard, they tend to be a lot more open to what you're, quote, selling.
Sure. How do you deal with when you know that the conversation is it's not sinking in? And I'll just bring in a reference to this. And this is something as a leader I learned a long time ago, which is, am I ready for the conversation or am I not ready for the conversation? If I'm not ready for the conversation, I'll let people know that this is something that I just really cannot focus on right now. I'm curious what in your toolkit, how do you sense that out, and how do you deal with that?
I think sometimes you have to take a step back and reposition. And I've had to do that very recently with something where I did get pushback from a client and had to work with them on some of their concerns. And some of them I didn't have an answer as to what I was proposing, how it would work for them, in which case it was, well, you know what, let's think on this, and we can brainstorm it together and come up with a solution to it. And making it, it's still part of what you're advocating for, but you need to work on it in a sense of tailoring what you're doing to the needs of your client, whether that's, a person or an actual client.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I want to get to the third part of this question. And Daniel, this is sort of the source topic of what you were talking about online, about what trade associations should be doing in this space. What do you think that, if you're a member of an association, what are you expecting from them? What are you expecting them to help with and to enable when you have such causes?
Yeah, you mean like in the Agile space?
Yeah, in the Agile space, any space actually. And so I'm going to throw that in a wider context.
Yeah. So I think we can. I think it's correct and not unreasonable for us to expect leadership from leaders. People who are in leadership roles in industry-leading institutions should expect to have to field challenging questions about the issues of the day. Where they stand and where they might want to take us with respect to the issue. You quoted 100,000 members of the Agile Alliance. That's a lot of reach. That's a lot of potential influence if you choose to reach people with a certain message or not. And there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. So number one, I think it's normal to expect a lot from leaders in industry-leading institutions, and those that are in the roles inside those institutions should come to expect challenging questions. That would be number one. In the Agile space, I have a scary idea, which is that Agile has the potential to actually improve everyone's capacity to improve their lives. So, for example, one of your slides in the beginning here, Ray, showed what the Agile Alliance was all about, and it said that it was to have work that's effective, humane, and sustainable, right? So if we do achieve that at work, that's going to spill over into our personal and lives and our family relationships as well. So I think Agile has the potential to be world changing because people spend their best waking hours at work, and Agile is found there, right? So the wider picture is that we could, in theory, influence the whole world in a positive way. I think most of the Agile industry doesn't think in those terms right now. But imagine, if you will, a world where executive buyers understand that employee engagement in the change is essential. And imagine executives know that impositions and mandates, are harmful to people, they're expensive and wasteful, and most importantly, contrary to Agile principles. Imagine that executives knew that. And imagine that we were all experiencing better results because executives know those things. What would have to happen for us to get from where we are now to that place? I have a hypothesis, and I believe that if the leading institutions exercise some leadership by taking some positions on the things I just mentioned, that executives would learn and know and understand all those things, and we'd make substantial progress in this Agile world, and we'd have a shot at the larger opportunity. So.
Sure. Well, I think a couple aspects to that. As a leader, I've recognized that, I've held very big positions in a Fortune 100 business. And I've learned over my experience and my bruises and my scars that, top-down mandates and those types of ways of going about them just didn't work. The other aspect is that jealousy works incredibly well within our community, meaning that, and funny, I talked about yesterday about Spotify, the people who keep saying, don't copy me. Don't copy us. And what do people do? They go off and copy Spotify all the time. But, their word of caution of please understand what we're doing, but, don't copy exact. That's not the right approach to go off and do. And trade associations, I think, and I think some of the names that are in our bigger community, the one thing to point out is that some of them are not nonprofit organizations. They have a profit motivator behind some of their actions and what they do. Others that are in the nonprofit space, some of them either have what I would consider to be the soft leadership, kind of let's let things evolve and let's create the environments around it so change can happen. And then others are, you're right, the voice is just not there. Abe, did you have something to add to this?
Really interesting topic we're actually discussing today. For me, based on my experience, I will say that Agile coaches, I presume we bear the brunt most of the time when things go wrong. And I also, from my experience, it seems advocating for agile transformation and change in the way people do things, it's normally more from the bottom up. Sometimes the executives, they just play lip service to agile transformation. Sometimes they do not truly understand what agile means. And hence, when something goes wrong, it's either the agile coach, the scrum masters, the delivery managers that get it first. I do not know how we can try to prevent such things from happening, because I do not believe it aligns with agile values or scrum values or whichever framework we're using, the values. We have to be open, we have to be honest, we have to understand that whilst we are working in an agile environment, the expectation should be we fail fast and learn from our mistakes, and then we try to improve things. But that's why I think this area, it's in this space that associations should stand up and maybe support their agile coaches and maybe scrum masters in the organizations that they find themselves in.
Sure, I agree with that. I think that as a person who's been in the agile space for well over close to 2 decades, which that puts some age on me, which I don't like. But anyway, being in that space for so long, I know that there's been certain times, and I've seen a pattern of coaches that, which I consider to be the coaches that have high influence in the industry, that suddenly start to pick up topics that are similar to that and start talking about them because we want to see change in those areas. And in the question of top-down mandates and also this accountability thing, which is some of that was our own doing. I remember someone explaining Scrum to me and saying that, well, the product owner is the single wringable neck if value doesn't get created for the organization. And that just rubbed me wrong, which is, there's a lot more people involved with the minimum viable product than just the product owner in that case. And in certain cases, those product owners were never empowered to do that position correctly. But from an advocacy perspective, I know that there's been a number of different high profile, much higher profile coaches than myself and others who use their platforms to start on topics and start to advocate for change within the environment. My entire keynote that was yesterday was about trying to bend the curve of mandates, try to get people to understand that if you're going to adopt Agile, Agile is not what other people do. Agile is about what we do as an organization, and I think that becomes critical and important.
I want to offer a hypothesis, right? So first of all, the Agile community is an organization. It's a member, loose community of people. It's still a social system. So we could think of it like an organization, right? So when we go into orgs, we go for continuous improvement. So where's the continuous improvement in the Agile space? That's the first question. And then the second question is, have executives been well served? Do they know that mandates don't work? If they don't know that mandates don't work, is that on us? And have we been what's the word, remiss in advancing their education? Why is it that executives continuously demand mandate imposition rollout services when everyone knows that stuff doesn't actually work because disengaged people can't transform anything at all? So I think we need to get to the executive education piece, and that's a question of the ambient culture or the ambient common knowledge. And I think it's on the institutions to get it out there one way or the other. And if we don't do that, then we're just going to end up with our own version of Groundhog Day, right? So if we want progress, we're going to have to do something different than what we're doing now. I offer the hypothesis that the industry-leading institutions could do a better job of establishing what's been working and what has not been working, and maybe even issuing some protective warnings to executives who are extremely well-meaning but don't know any better.
Actually, done almost the opposite. I recently was invited to an exco of a company, and basically that exco, well, it's some company from another company, and I was working in one part of that company, and another part was actually kind of forced or asked to go agile from the head office, let's call it like that. And we were invited to do a presentation on agile. And big part of our presentation, we did basically anti-publicity for an agile transformation. We said we explained what agile was, but at the same time we said we have to be very careful. You just can't not do the thing that you just said about Spotify. You cannot just copy whatever we're doing at the other things. And if you really want to do it, you have to understand that you, and with the you we meant the exco, you really have to do your part of the work. That means that there is transformations for you as well. It's not just levels down that people have to change. And so basically we try to talk them out of that, to say, if you want to do it, just think very hard about what you want to do it, why do you want to do it, and how, and then we can go on the next step. We can go, if you're still interested, we can do a next workshop and do some more work on what does it actually mean for you. But we send them home with homework to think about, do you really want to do it? Which I think is much better than just advocating and saying you have to do all of this.
I'm going to share a story about Mary Poppendick, if anyone has ever worked with her before. I remember, and this was the early days back at Intel when we were doing our first Agile adoption in our work. And we thought, we wanted to have Mary come in and help us with some stuff, help consult with us a bit. And so we had our first meeting with her, and she said, well, I need you to read this book and then call me back. So we read that book, and we took her homework home, and then we said, yeah, we read the book. And she says, well, what did you learn from it? And we listed the things we learned from it. And she goes, great, now I need you to read this book. I need you to do these things. And then if you get through that, please call me back. And she did this like about 5 times. And then finally, when we got to the last phone call, she said, damn. She says, it looks like you guys are ready for me to come in and have the conversation. And what she was doing as a consultant, and I've used this in my own world, which is she was really telling us we weren't ready yet. We weren't ready for the types of things that were there. And she was helping to go set the stage with that. And I thought that was beautiful. Let's see, Elizabeth, are you there?
Something that someone just said stuck with me about getting executives to advocate, or really that there needs to be some buy-in from the executive top level for Agile to work. And I think one of the first tools that was mentioned earlier in their call was getting executives to advocate on your behalf. And I guess my question is, what's the tool what do you tell, how do you get executive buy-in? What are some of the tools that you do for that? I think in my experience, there is some resistance, possibly because there isn't a full understanding of what role executives or top managers play in Agile, given that it's very much about cross-functional teams collaborating, self-organizing. What is the role for executives? I feel like that would help with buy-in. That's the question for the group.
The first thing I would try is a meeting around the Agile Manifesto that I call the A1 meeting, where you spend like half an hour explaining the manifesto to them, and then the whole leadership system should be in the room, and they should be invited, right? So like maybe 20, 25 people are invited, 30, and you get maybe 20 or 15. And it's online, right, in the COVID era. And what you do is you explain the 4 values and 12 principles, put them in a breakout of like 3 or 4 people in a breakout, and ask them to identify the principles that will be the most difficult to honor. This will get them thinking about this stuff, and then you will be able to build a map, because when those breakouts come back, they're going to have some common things to say about what's going to be difficult, and then that's going to help you to figure out, okay, where can I help them the most? It's in these 2 principles, these 3 principles that are common. That's a super good thing to do right there. And then the very next thing that I do is I have something called the Scrum checklist for executives, or you can call it the Agile checklist if you want. And I use it with Scrum. And what I do is I pull out all the difficult, hard to deal with, awkward statements in the Scrum guide. Like, for the product owner to be successful, everyone in the organization must respect his or her decisions, right? That's a really difficult line in the Scrum guide. So I have them scored in 2 dimensions. Number 1, what's my level of agreement with the statement? And then what's my leadership team's level of alignment and agreement with the statement? And it's scored on a 1 to 10, where 10 is perfect and 1 is like, I don't agree at all. And then I put that into a spreadsheet and I kind of show them, like, okay, here's the responses we got. And we have that conversation. And within the context of that conversation, you can explain what it's going to take for executives to support the Scrum or the Agile or the Kanban. You can walk them through the rules of Kanban, same thing, right? Nothing goes on the Kanban board unless and until it's characterized by work item type. That's going to be difficult for a lot of organizations to swallow. So you get the leadership team in a room, you have those conversations, and you find out what their level of willingness is, and also you teach them what good Kanban looks like and what it's going to take from them to achieve good Kanban across the enterprise, right? So there's 2 things you can do right there. Walk them through the manifesto, and then walk them through the Scrum guide, and explain what it's going to take to support what the Scrum guide says.
The other thing from that perspective, just to add to that, is the influence of the success of what you have with your experimentation with any of these methods is, I think, a very powerful motivator to bring people on board. Because if you think executives, they're all dealing with a list of problems that they are dealing with on a daily basis. I think you understanding what those problems are, sitting down and talking with them. I've never had an executive deny me a conversation about what are the things that are keeping you up at night. And then I think it's that sort of marrying those 2 things together and saying, okay, well, this is how these things are helping the organization. I think that is critical. Sheila, you raised your hand up again. Did you want to add another point to this?
I raised my hand.
Yeah, you did.
Sorry.
Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, we have 2 Sheilas here. Yeah.
You, Sheila McGrath?
Yes.
I raised my hand. Yes.
We are dueling Sheilas again today, which is great.
Yeah, count on it.
Yes.
I think using the Agile Manifesto can be a 2-edged sword because it was a statement in time by a group of developers. So it has a focus on development. So if you're talking today, I think where we need to be going in general with Agile is to enterprise agility, not just to IT. The statements in there are very specifically focused on IT. I mean, there's one about software. Well, that really isn't looking at it from the organizational, the enterprise perspective. So if you're going to use that as a frame of reference, especially with executives who tend to be fairly literal people in my experience, I think you need to be careful how you frame it. Another one is to talk about face-to-face communication. What does face-to-face mean today in a world where most of us can't be face-to-face? And a lot of executives tend to be a little old school and think that we should all go back to being face-to-face as soon as it's at all possible. But if you're talking about an agile world, and if you're talking about VUCA, and you're talking about global enterprises, odds are that being face-to-face with everybody in person just isn't a possibility. So you need to frame that discussion with executives if you're going to have it. The other thing I'd be concerned about if you're trying to introduce agility is that you really do need champions at the executive level who won't just pay lip service and say, yes, do it, but will actually model some of the behavior. And one other thing is that I have an issue with anybody who says that you must do any framework in a specific prescribed way. I've never seen that work in an organization. Organizations need to make it their own. And if you keep doing the same thing, you're no longer agile. I mean, it is something where there's continuous change, continuous improvement, and with VUCA, it's just going to continue to increase.
And when you say VUCA, I think of Hendrik. Hendrik, what do you think about that?
In my experience, most executives, they know VUCA. They came to their executive positions, because exactly they are understanding the concept of VUCA. So I have actually stopped talking too much about VUCA, but rather showing them that there might be better responses to VUCA than the ones that they have exercised so far. That's a bit my take on the thing. Complexity and constant change and so on, that's the world they already live in.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that there needed to be a big discussion around VUCA itself, just that in the world that we're in, where change is accelerating and we don't know where it's going to go, you need to consider that in the way you approach anything Agile, that's the advantage of Agile, really, is to respond to change in a better way, in a quicker way. But yeah, I wouldn't waste a lot of energy on talking to them about VUCA. I'd kind of mention it in passing, I think, and then move on to, now what do we do from here? Because that's where they want to go.
Yeah, the illusion of control, that's, in my opinion, the biggest problem. The need for trying to control the uncontrollable and showing them how you can stay in the grip of the VUCA world without using the illusion of control tools that you have learned in the past.
But that's why when you talk about VUCA, when you talk about control, that's why they want people to go back into the office if they do, is because they feel like they're more in control if they can physically see people. It's not rational, it's not practical, it serves no useful purpose, but it's just something that it'll make them feel more in control.
Yeah, it's so they can sleep better at night. Hey, Mark, your hand went up. What do you have on this?
I appreciate the conversation and all the ideas. They definitely ring a bell. And I'm not responding to anything in particular, but over time, I've been impacted by the idea of the meta framework idea. And I think it comes from the lean world, like the improvement kata and coaching kata. So I wanted to just mention, sometimes I found myself and others, we get lost in some of the details. And the devil is in the details, as they say. But the value that I've come to learn, reading from, Mike Rother and others, is this meta framework idea gets you into a place where you're practicing something that can apply to almost any situation, because it's simply a process, a very simple process habit that you can take where you need to. So for example, the improvement kata talking about defining a direction or a challenge. I heard someone mention earlier, being very clear on the problem we want to address as a first step. Two, looking at current conditions, like, what are we missing? What do we have? Are we constrained in this way? And then defining where we want to be. I think I heard someone describe the importance of understanding outcomes. This is what we expect the future to look like. Great conversation. Can we imagine where we want to go before we solution? And then experimenting. I guess that's the one thing that I would offer and that I've begun to practice in my organization, is conducting experiments, getting slices of the organization to volunteer to try something small. And we're not going to solve the world's problems, but we are going to try to make one improvement. And we're going to do it by specifying a hypothesis, having some very simple indicators of success or failure, and then trying something and evaluating it. So back to that kind of fail fast, learn fast. So yeah, if we can get experimentation happening, I also think one of the benefits is when you experiment with people on the ground, they start to experience something that can only be learned by doing it, not really by talking about it. And that I've found is powerful. And then they go tell their friend or neighbor or coworker. And now I'm not the one advocating the change, they are, because they experienced it. And I found that can have very powerful impact.
I would have maybe a small thing I would like to add to the discussion, which I think that came a bit along, but and the question is, for me, advocacy, where does it start? And I was starting to think about, where do executives come from? And I think they come, for example, from universities. And that's a thing that we could also start looking more into. Can we start influencing universities, MBA studies, and so on, with thinking coming from the Agile community? Because I believe that if executives get exposed to this kind of thinking already when they study, I think there's a higher chance that in the future we have more executives embracing these ideas.
I fully agree. We at Intel, I used to run a group called Emergent Systems. And one of the pillars that we used to do is we used to go off and we send executives to the Stanford leadership courses. And so we went over and influenced their curriculum. We helped them to add certain aspects of things that we needed the executives to know. And anyone who's been to this program was, number one, it was a scarcity to get, to be brought in. So it was like a really huge honor as an executive to be brought to this course. So they paid attention to it. The other thing, which is just as a passing thought with this, and I was just thinking in contrast, and we were talking with Edgar Schein, if anyone knows him, he's a luminary. And he talked about our group, and it was just he says, how do you survive? The foreshadowing of that moment was, as leadership shifted around within the organization, we didn't survive. And I don't mean to leave us with a closing thought of a bad thing, but I just remember just the foreshadowing of the fact that these things happened in waves and trends. I think that the advocacy is strong in areas where it's easy, and then there's other times when advocacy becomes incredibly hard. And when it becomes incredibly hard, keep in mind there's going to be times that you yourself as a coach are going to lose, and that's going to happen. And the trick is that you need communities that you can go back to in order to recharge yourself and to be able to gain the strength for the next offensive that you're going to go off and go to. With that, we are at the top of the hour. I want to appreciate everyone and their comments and their thoughts on this. I wanted to go point out a couple of things. If you want to continue the conversation, there are a couple of things that are out there that you can go participate with. If you're an Agile Alliance member, we have a meet and greet that happens monthly. We have a couple of things like the Agile Tech Talks, as well as people have been demanding lean coffee because we don't run lean coffee enough in our world, but they wanted this to be more like lean coffee, and my view was we just have to go create lean coffee in another space. So we actually are running lean coffee. We've had a couple of sessions. We've had some great visitors to there. I think that if you go look up the Agile Alliance events, go join these efforts because I think they're really cool, and I think that they provide a lot of places where we can discuss these types of things. We are coming down to the end of the year. So for anyone who's been a part of the Agile Coaching Network for a while, we will have our last live recording on November 19th. So it's a little bit earlier than we normally have in the year, and it will be the last recording for the year, the last meeting of the year. We might do another special Christmas special, or I might schedule just a small holiday party for us in our Topia space. Look for those announcements. And with that, I'd just like to thank again everyone. Thank you for all of the insights and everything that everyone shared today. That's what makes this community beautiful. This podcast is provided by Agile Alliance for educational and informative purposes only. To find out more information about the member-supported Agile Alliance, please go to agilealliance.org to find out about more upcoming events, as well as different programs that are available to help you with your Agile journey.